Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome. I am so excited to have our latest guest on the show, Erin Borbet. And I just wanted to share that we connected through a mutual friend originally, and I had the joy of meeting Erin at her beautiful home in Victor, Idaho. She lives in this incredibly gorgeous nature place, and she invited some of my team over for breakfast and made the most incredible breakfast spread that I've ever seen in my entire life. And it just sort of, having somebody invite you into their home and lavish you with all these yummy foods was just like so indicative of what a nourishing person that Erin is in the world. And so I'm just going to share with you that she is a transformational health coach and herbalist. And after 7 years of a private acupuncture practice in New York City, Erin now works remotely with women all over the world to resolve hormonal symptoms and nourish fertility. She has her master's of science in Chinese medicine, clinical experience working in renowned hospitals such as NYU Medical Center, the New York VA Hospital, Zhejiang Hospital in China, the Berkley Center for Reproductive Wellness in New York, Planned Parenthood in San Diego, and the Lutheran Medical Center in Brooklyn. She uses her 15 years of clinical experience to provide our clients with a comprehensive, holistic health strategy and effective natural solutions. And it's her belief that true and lasting healing must also integrate emotional and spiritual aspects, which she addresses via consistent coaching calls. So I'm so excited you're here, Erin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, I was saying one of the things I'd love to talk about on this show is how to create a business in a style that's all your own. And so not only would I love to know how you originally came to Chinese medicine as your modality, but I'm also really interested in how you made this really interesting transition from the hustle and bustle of New York City, where everything is on the cutting edge and happening, to working in person remotely in Idaho.
Yeah, that's a great question and a big journey. As far as how I got into Chinese medicine, I had this fascination as a child with China and anything Chinese. I loved eating Chinese food. I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, so I don't even know if what I was eating or interacting with was actually even close to what it was really like in China. But I was fascinated by it. And I was actually, even as young as like 10 or 11, vision boarding, which I didn't know at the time was what it was, but I was clipping magazines and newspapers and everything and pasting all these images of China, essentially, of the cities, the countryside, the mountains. I just had this like fascination, and my mom started to see it. So she would take me to travel agencies, and I could pick out at the time, like that's where you bought tickets if you wanted to go somewhere. So they had, booklets for countries all over the place. And I would pick out all the China or, all the Eastern Asian ones, Japan, all of it. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I would clip them and keep this in this vision board and then, or in these books that I guess, could be translated to vision boarding. And then, in my teens, I kind of started traveling, and I also started developing some anxiety, like some pretty severe anxiety. My dad was an avid meditator. He had a heart attack at age 40 and survived and began meditating. And
wow,
he taught me how. It became a very profound thing for him. So that started to help. And then I also started to see holistic practitioners. I'm not even really sure how I entered their offices, but for me, I found craniosacral to be like transforming. It was the only thing that touched my anxiety at the time. And, then this kind of fast forward to my college years, I was able to study abroad and study traditional healing systems. And I spent a year in China and kind of got into the understanding of acupuncture and Chinese herbs. And I, of course, went to China because I had this fascination with China, but also this fascination with the holistic healing arts. And that's where they just kind of married. And I apprenticed with a doctor there at one of the hospitals and just got completely steeped in all of it, the culture and the medicine. And that kind of led me down the path of more formal education in it.
Wow.
So that's that story.
Did you learn Chinese when you were there?
I did. I did. Conversational.
Wow. Uh-huh.
I cannot read or write. I never could read or write, but I could converse less and less every year, but it's still in there a little bit.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of like a lot of the Chinese herb names in Chinese, right? And so, and you work with both Chinese herbs and acupuncture. Because most people will typically specialize in one or the other, right?
It's funny. In China, yes, you learn both and then you specialize. And in the US, the way the schools work is it depends on the state. Some states require that if you're an acupuncturist, you're also trained in Chinese herbs, and others you can do one or the other. So it kind of depends a little bit, but I did study both. It's a little bit longer program if you do that. But it made it much easier because I already knew what the herbs were called. I already knew their Chinese name. So all I had to learn was their Latin name and what they did, right? Which is still a lot of information. Learn all of that stuff and the Chinese name, this totally foreign pronunciation, was a pretty cool leg up to have in school, not having to go back and do all that. So it did serve me.
Yeah. So I'm thinking the traditional Chinese herbalists have all those beautiful cabinets with little drawers and the herbs, and then you'd have all your needles. Like, how are you making that transition from New York to Idaho without having all those tools? And how does that work?
It's definitely been a transition. And I've always had dreams of housing my own pharmacy with those little drawers and the beautiful cabinets. And I'm actually right now feeling that pull more than ever to perhaps have some sort of clinical or pharmacy space, even here in my small mountain town. So we'll see that could be something developing. But in New York, there's, Chinatown, which is an amazing resource and has awesome pharmacies where you can just, have your clients go and pick up custom stuff or patent stuff. I did always have like a small patent pharmacy so people could get like pills or tinctures or something right in the office. And then I've moved everything online. I work with a company based in Colorado they don't do raw herbs, but they do custom granules or patents, topical, internal. And I just put in the prescription for my clients, and the clients go fill them and they create them if they're a prescription that needs to be formulated, and then they drop ship them to the client. So that's been a really amazing advancement in Chinese herbal medicine.
Wow. It's almost like you have your own drop ship facility there that can fill whatever their custom.
Yes. And I've been looking, these past couple of years, I've been trying to train a little bit more in Western herbs just because I find them so fun. And I have yet to find a Western, facility that does this same kind of thing. It's so interesting to me that, Chinese medicine has kind of taken off in this way that, maybe people wouldn't think. Because to me, Western herbs seem so much more common and approachable. But as far as you can buy a lot of Western herbs at your Whole Foods or your health food store, so that is helpful and accessible. But as far as like a compounding, customizing pharmacy, to my knowledge, it doesn't exist. And I've talked with a lot of my teachers, and to their knowledge, it doesn't exist. And that's one thing I hope starts to change too. Because
big opportunity.
Yeah, right. For someone out there.
Right. And typically I go to see my acupuncturist and he feels my pulse and he looks at my tongue and he kind of takes a look at my chi, does a once over. How does that work when you're like looking at someone through a screen? I mean, I know you get a good feel for someone's energy by looking at them, but how else do you translate that physical hands-on experience to digital? Well,
yes, definitely the screen and video and photos. I always have people send me photos of their tongue and photos of their face, and I, add them into their chart. So I always have that to look back on in addition to the, visual interactive, memory of the video. That's a big one for me. Obviously, I can't take their pulse, but I've also been relying on tapping into the energy of people and really like finding my confidence in that, which I always did in the treatment room and on the table. Essentially, when taking their pulse, I was also tapping into their energy. I've been taking that piece. For me, it involves doing a clearing meditation for whoever I'm going to talk to before the call. So I spend 10 minutes and ground my energy, and then I visualize tapping into theirs and kind of what that feels like, so that I go into the call already a little bit connected. And then I just am honing that in after the call and using that from the language of Chinese medicine. So sometimes it translates into like an acupuncture theory, meridian type visualization, and sometimes it's completely different. So,
oh my God, yes, I want a doctor. I want you as my doctor. So my doctor does a 10-minute meditation and it tunes into me before we even get on our Skype call. It's incredible.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the kinds of things that you're working on with your clients these days through this digital communication? Like what, hormonal or?
That's like my expertise and my background is hormonal. So it tends to be what I attract, the kind of a large quantity of women trying to get pregnant, kind of in that fertility world, either now or who are dealing with some sort of endocrine imbalance like endometriosis or polycystic ovarian syndrome that, you know, they want to try and get under control before they want to get pregnant. That's the majority of my population right now. But what I've found is that usually people come to me for symptoms and then, you know, we get the symptoms under control. But what we end up really, you know, talking about on our calls is more, you know, life stuff, whatever it is, the emotional aspect, the spiritual aspect. It could be, you know, career, relationship, family, location. You know, these are like big kind of buzzwords, but usually there's something else going on when there's a hormonal symptom showing up, and that's been really wonderful to help transform.
Well, don't statistics say anyway that 90% of all physical imbalances are caused by emotional? I mean, I think even just in terms of like the philosophy behind flower essences, it's like that idea that emotional and mental patterning is the root cause of all physical imbalances anyway. So it would make sense to me that all of those issues would arise in a consultation, and yet you look at this Western model and it's really just so symptoms based that you never actually really get to the root cause.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where the holistic medicine comes in.
And how does a woman know that her hormones are off? Like, how would I know if my hormones are out of balance?
Well, you wouldn't feel yourself, feel like yourself. If you're cycling, that could be symptomatic, right? So painful periods or irregular periods, you know, things that are, you know, invasive to your life.
Okay, on that note, let me just interject, because actually there's a fair amount of women on my team that have excruciating periods. So is that normal or not normal? Let's get into that, because I know a lot of women who are just like, you know what, when it's that time, it's like a week of hell, and I take all these painkillers and curl up with a hot water bottle in my bed. And what's happening there?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first, I want to say that as women, I really think that our periods are something to be honored and celebrated. And that I think, and there is a tradition of, you know, that monthly passage being honored and celebrated, right? So not that by having a period you're weak or something, but have your period to take a break and rest and don't push yourself and curl up on the couch with a mug of tea. And we don't. And so sometimes I find that ritual needs to happen, but it shouldn't happen because you're in excruciating pain. So finding the balance for you. And I think intuitively, you know, more women do feel lower energy and want to rest more on their period. And that's something that is, you know, in some ways physiological. The excruciating pain is not. In Chinese medicine, there's like a saying or a theory that the only symptom of your period should be moderate bleeding every, you know, 28 to 32 days. And that's it. And everything else that we feel is a sign of imbalance somewhere, other than that lining shed. So there is always something to work on with that, whether it's blockage or a deficiency or an excess or heat or cold or all of these things in Chinese medicine that are the pathogenic factors that could be causing this imbalance. Something is going on. And
so do you also recommend food and nutritional recommendations in terms of like hearing you talk about heat and cold and deficiency?
Yep, absolutely. And I was doing so much nutritional counseling in my private practice in New York. You know, a lot of my clients would come in for their treatment, so then they'd stay for another half hour to talk about food. So I knew there's a need for this. And for me, food is absolutely the number one medicine. If I can get people to heal themselves with food, then they don't need me, which I don't want them to need me, and they don't need anyone else to control their health. They can kind of be the authority on what's right for them based on how they're feeling and how they know their body responds to certain foods, and make those decisions on the fly.
And might not necessarily need the herbs too, right? I mean,
Exactly,
I hear a lot of Eastern, here in the West, we're very much like superfoods and supersize and all these special ingredients and load up our smoothies, all of these things from the Amazon and everywhere. Yeah. And then when I listen to like my Eastern friends, they always say, well, if you're not sick, don't take any medicine.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. If you're not sick, don't take any medicine. And I am also very careful with herbs. Like a lot of people are like, well, so am I going to have to take this for the rest of my life? And no, like if we use herbs, it is for a very specific reason to transform a very specific pattern. And then you come off of them. It's not like you should need herbs every month to not have period cramps. That to me hasn't actually solved the problem, right? It hasn't gotten to the root. So absolutely. Food is a first line of defense for sure. And I'm also very wary of those, superfoods. I mean, there's too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing, right? Like they're all fine for you, but I'm much more fascinated by the kind of ancestral eating notion. And like, if you didn't grow up in the Amazon, is that berry really the one thing that's going to transform your health from the other side of the world? I don't know, maybe, but maybe not.
What are like one or two or three of your favorite herbs or ones that you've been using recently that you just love?
Well, my favorite herb, so in Chinese medicine, we talk about constitutional factor in Chinese, in 5-element theory. And so with that, we're all made up of these 5 elements, but each of us are kind of born with a signature element, so to speak, like one that stands out more than the others. And I'm a wood element, a wood constitutional factor. And for that reason, I tend to gravitate towards wood constitutional formulas and herbs. And my favorite herb is called chaihu. It's bupleurum. It helps the liver to see its vision, which is why I love it. It also releases the exterior and does some things for physical stuff. But one of my teachers describes it as this, you have a fly in a jar and you take the lid off the jar and the fly still just stays in the jar. But chaihu helps it see the exit, right? So it can go outside of the jar and see all the things that are waiting there that it couldn't see, right? It couldn't access on its own. So to me, it's just this beautiful spiritual herb. I usually put it in almost everyone's formulas, but I always am taking it in mine because that's where I get tripped up for sure. So that's by far my favorite Chinese herb. And right now, my favorite Western herb is ashwagandha. And I'm just loving it for people who are just having this kind of heart spirit. We call it shen in Chinese medicine, but just I don't even know the word. It's not a weakness, but it's just like an agitation almost, very subtle, not like anxiety or anything full blown, but it just kind of helps encapsulate the heart a little bit and put a little protection on it so that people can feel a little more grounded, sleep a little bit better. I've been taking it myself recently, and I'm 7 months postpartum, and I'm feeling the complete shakeup of what that means. At about 5 months, it just kind of, hit me like a ton of bricks. And I've been using ashwagandha to help just that soothing all that internal disruption that happens with postpartum hormones, and the external disruption of being, woken up 3 times a night, at someone's beck and call all day, all these things. It can be hard to transition to, but I'm just loving that herb. And it's gentle and safe for nursing and for people who are taking other medications, but it's so profound. So my favorite.
And just hearing you talk about the constitutions, can we talk about the constitutions a little more? Because I imagine people would be really curious to know. I know that, for example, I'm most lacking in the water element, which makes it interesting living here in the desert, really prone to dehydration. But I've never heard it described as each person sort of having a predominant element. element. How does that work? And what's each constitution like?
Well, so within Chinese medicine, there are many different schools. And one of those schools is 5-element acupuncture. Traditionally, the 5-element school doesn't even use herbs at all. It's acupuncture only. So only practitioners within that school will speak of this kind of constitutional factor. If you're talking with just a, kind of straight Chinese medicine, they might not know what this is about, or they might know it but don't use it. Or like Korean acupuncture, Japanese acupuncture, they all have their own kind of schools. So that's where it comes from. If you haven't heard of it, or if your acupuncturist isn't talking about it, that's probably why. One of my clinical supervisors that I spent the most time with in school was only a 5-element practitioner. And so I just kind of loved it. Fell in love. And so I, dabble with it. So there's the 5 elements, fire, earth, metal, water, wood, and we are all of them. But if you can find somebody's constitutional factor, it's like the note they resonate on. So like, for example, if you consistently present with water, symptoms, whatever that might look like, I don't know your constitutional factor. I might be able to speculate, but but let's say your constitutional factor is metal, those, you can treat the water all that you want and it will help. But until you can hit your CF, your constitutional factor note of metal, maybe doing water points on the metal meridian, maybe using a formula that's based in, a metal element, but adding the water herbs. When you hit that note, then the symptoms can kind of transform from the root, so to speak, if, the root of that lineage. It's one system. I don't believe any system has it better or more right than other systems. So I hate being like, that's the way you get to the root, because there are other ways to the root. But just speaking in constitutional factor, that's kind of how it would work.
And so if someone were predominantly fire, how would you know that? Or what would be their typical signature?
It takes me a while to get to know clients' constitutional factors. I would say within about 2 to 3 months of working together, I have a pretty good idea. And traditionally, you use your 5 senses for determining it. So smell, and it's like a subtle smell. You smell the inside of somebody's arm, and there's like specific, very, very, very subtle smells that go along with each organ. There's also colors. You can actually see the colors that go along with each element. On somebody's temples, actually, is where they look for it. The tone and the pitch of their voice is another way. Now, working remotely with people, I've kind of lost, a lot of the sensory accessibility to it. But there are also themes in people which, tend to kind of come up, like places they tend to get stuck, or personality tendencies they have that you can kind of pick up and be like, oh, is that because their earth element is out of whack, or is that because they're an earth constitutional factor? And, kind of trying to mold it and understand it, which is why it takes me so long to figure it out with people. But then once it's apparent, it's like, oh, it walks first thing in the room, first thing on the call. Oh, okay, let's work with that.
And then you have a greater understanding of like the exact key to put in the keyhole to unlock.
Yes, exactly. Wow. And then using that information to also help them illuminate for themselves where, even if you don't have a great knowledge of the 5 elements, if I can explain it and educate people that, okay, this is kind of, the movement in this system, and here's where you are, and here's where you gravitate. And, you can bring that awareness into the choices you're making throughout the day and into how you feel. And you can kind of navigate with that.
That's one thing I just love is this whole idea of awareness and time. And I think, we, in our culture, we've gotten to this sort of, I learned it in a weekend workshop kind of mentality that we want everything to be fast and speedy. We want shortcuts. We want enlightenment tomorrow through some ayahuasca trip, or we want everything super fast. And I think that there's actually this magic in dialing it down and actually slowing down, because what's happened is we've just sped up out of control. And I sometimes think like the trees must just look at us and kind of laugh and say like, actually, no, it's slowing down so you can actually listen and hear and tune in and have this greater sense of what's happening around and inside of you. And so when I hear you talk, it's very apparent that in the culture and the tradition that you've learned and you've put in tremendous amounts of time and study. And this is coming from a lineage that's thousands of years old. And even just this notion that you would take the time to spend months with each of your clients to really figure out and dial in what is their specific constitution. That's fascinating to me. And I wondered if you had anything to add about that concept of time.
Yeah. I mean, I love how you said that, that we're kind of amped up and we want everything faster and tomorrow. And I certainly walk that line of, I mean, I know when I need to dial it back and, surrender a little bit more. Yeah, it's a push and pull. And in the holistic world, so with acupuncture, I found it, easier in a way for people to come into my office and, talk a little bit and then get needles and lay there, right? And have their experience, whatever it's going to be, hold that space for them for 20, 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then tell them to come back and do that every week, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's amazing. And translating that to a virtual practice has been interesting, mm-hmm. And seeing the importance of also holding space for people in their kind of more mental, emotional, unwinding, right? So I don't sit in silence on the phone with them. We're talking, a lot of listening, sometimes crying. My calls are always an hour, 50 minutes. There's a big space for them to unwind and be witnessed. And that is also very important kind of energetic expression that needs to happen. But sometimes I find it can be harder for people to accept that they need that. Like doing that every week for 3 months for themselves and then see how they feel about things. It's a certain person who comes to me for coaching, right?
It's kind of scary, right? It could be kind of scary.
Yeah. And a lot of people just want their symptoms to go away and they just want to be fit and feel better. And I get that because when you don't feel good, it's scary. In addition to many other emotions, but ultimately very scary because you don't know what that means. Does it mean something bigger? And really being there with people. And I don't think people are used to having anyone be there with them for that. Their doctors certainly aren't, right? They're of a medical healing capacity, right? That's where their holistic practitioners come in. And so now being a holistic practitioner that's actually just sitting in the space with them and not treating them, right? I'm not doing anything to their energy other than, as much as I can tapping into it. It's a different kind of healing that's happening. And so I'm trying to learn more about that too.
It's like it's like a treat, right? The fact that it is a little unnerving that I'm worth that much time and attention and focus from another human being.
Yes.
And even the people that we love in our own lives may not have an hour of undivided attention to really dig into what's happening in our lives, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so uncomfortable for a lot of people. I can think of one client I had last winter who started with me, and she's just so lovely for, PMS or something. And I have this, I make my clients commit to weekly calls for at least a month, anyone who starts with me, because there's too much that unfolds and develops. And if we cut short, then everyone's missing out, especially them. So I made her commit to it. And every week before our call, she would email me and be like, I don't really think I have anything to talk about. Can we push it off another week? And I was like, no, my policy. We can push it off later. Like, let's do it. And every week, believe me, we used up that hour, usually trying to go over a little, right? By the end of that month, it was like, she kind of got it, and we continued to work together longer, but you have to kind of experience it to know what that kind of space holding will do for your life and your health, right? To become come into it to change symptoms. But like you said, 90% is also your, emotions. So how can we also address that aspect? And for me, the biggest way is by consistently showing up to transform it, right? You can't just sit back and hope that you'll feel better. And this is part of it. And it's so interesting to me that like she especially, and I see it in a lot of all my other clients, it's like they try and worm their way out of it. It's like, but do I have to show up tomorrow? Because I don't need it. And it's usually when you need it the most, right? Like, what are you trying to hide from? And what is it that you're not seeing? And that's where it starts to come up, whether consciously or subconsciously, it starts to come up and gets metabolized and released. And that's when you change. So.
Well, it reminds me of like Vipassana retreats where people will isolate for 21 days and then in those moments of finally being quiet and silent and not having communication with anyone else, then suddenly their minds start to just kick into gear and they see all these things that are actually bumping around up in there that weren't fully in full bloom when there was so much other stimulus. And it sounds to me almost like what you're doing is opening up the space for people to see what else might be there. And it can be really uncomfortable because we're so focused on doing in this culture, and being is kind of a like you said, it can almost be uncomfortable. You open up the space and then what's going to rise, but it's also really exciting because what potential might be lying there that you haven't yet tapped into, that's just waiting to jump out if you give it a minute.
Exactly. That experience outside of the jar, right?
Right.
Pull it off. What's right there that you can't see? Yeah.
And how do you find, whether it's your own life or your clients, that the concept of time can stretch and bend with children?
Yeah. I'm in that one right now. So I'm fully, trying to figure it out in a new way and relating to it. And, and it probably spans also to women without children. Also, for me, what I've noticed is that self-care and just space to not be working and not be with your children and, not be doing dishes or cooking dinner or whatever, just to be, it's like, it doesn't happen unless you make it happen. And it's hard. It can be hard. I've noticed in my mind and certainly with my clients to not feel guilty for making time for that.
Because you could be giving it to your child.
I could be giving it to my child. I could be giving it to my work. I could be giving it to my family. I mean, there's like a million ways that I could be giving it. I think as mothers, we experience it on a different level. I certainly did than before I had kids, but even still, I don't think I allowed myself to just be all as often as I should have, perhaps. But now that there's kids, it's just like, boom, weeks, months can go by and there hasn't been a space for that. And I'm noticing the buildup of that. And now consciously trying to create creative ways to build that back in and doing it with my clients as well. So yeah.
How are you doing that? And what type of time increments? What's working?
Yeah, it's different than it was before, for sure. But for me, like meditation, as I said, I learned early, that's just a big thing for me. When I'm not doing it, it shows. So doing that, and I found some Kundalini meditations that I really like because they kind of get me there quickly, and they're 5 or 10 minutes. That to me is so doable to every day versus even 20 can sometimes be a stretch. And I make a commitment to getting in a few times a week where I'm by myself and I have my moment, but I do them anyways, even on days when I don't have help. And my 7-month-old is playing on the floor in front of me, or my toddlers are dancing around me. It's certainly not I can't leave my brain, because I'm also on for these people, but I'm still committing. I'm still sitting down. I'm still singing the mantras. So that for me has been like the biggest thing is seeing time as something that I have control over, even though I don't feel like I have any control because I have these little kids that just need things all day long, but I can mold into that. And in doing so, they're witnessing me taking that time for myself within them, right? And I hope, they're really young now, but I hope that they will have an easier time making time for self-care, making time for themselves, and not having so much guilt around it because they see me doing it with them. So I'm kind of playing with all that stuff right now.
Yeah, I love the idea of having your kids running around you while you're doing it, because it's like it's this, whole idea of being in the present moment and being with what is and embracing everything as part of the experience, that they're not a disruption. They're just a part of another sound coming in. I wonder if, I don't have children, so I couldn't comment on this, but sometimes when I am around children, I think, wow, the just being around children makes me be more present and helps me get out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can imagine that for women who have children, it can be physically exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I wonder if maybe moms are onto something, because, you may actually spend more of your day being present through your children. Is that something you've experienced, or?
Yes, definitely. For me, though, I've found that that's been one of the most challenging things, I think, is being able to be out of my head and present with them. It's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've gotten out of being a mother so far, because I find that my mind is constantly trying to not be present in that moment, right? Not constant, but a lot of the time, like being present with a 2.5-year-old is only stimulating my brain so far, right? And I see myself pull out, and I try and like make my list, or I try and, maybe I'll even try and answer a couple emails, dare I, while I have my kids here, and as soon as I pull out, that's when they start acting out. There's tantrums. That's when I get frustrated. We're all kind of snapping at each other, and it's not good, right? So it's like, it's a call to be more present, what, is to do in this new capacity, right? With these young people, it's been easier for me to do with adults and clients and entrepreneurship and work. And that to me is like an easier space to be present, but there's something to this being present in a new terrain. So yes, to answer your question, I think it does. But as someone who's the primary care provider, on a certain day, it's not for me easy to be in that present moment for 12 hours. That's different than like, when I get to spend less time with them, or, whatever. So it's a practice.
It sounds like a mindfulness, like a mindful awareness training boot camp.
Yeah. I think it is.
I think that's why mothers seem softer and more compassionate.
Yeah. The ones that can just surrender to it, I am in awe of them. And I know many of them where I'm just like, how are you doing it? How are you doing it? Like I find it the hardest thing to like sit and be, but doing those kind of meditation practices regularly, and some of them with them, they really do kind of lock me into that moment. And then I am able to be on their level and connect. And we're all so much happier, and the day goes so much smoother, and time becomes our friend that day versus our enemy. And, I think you could translate that to anything that you're spending your day doing that feels like you want to be somewhere else, but finding a way to be present if it's important enough, and then seeing the beauty that unfolds there.
Right. I'm curious about some of the most amazing realizations you've had as a mother, being able to create life in your body, and or as a doula, and watching other women do the same. What have you learned through that process on a sort of wonderment way?
Oh, a lot. It's kind of like there's two big things that come to mind with that question. And one is kind of this great responsibility that we have as women, because we have this ability, the effects of nutrition and lifestyle and all of that on our health that's proven time and time again. Also the effect that has on our unborn children, right? Through our own systemic health, which affects our own egg quality within our ovaries, and how that can translate then to, pregnancy, fetal health, newborn health, childhood health. Like we actually have the ability to lay the foundation of the next generation by the way we treat ourselves, right? By the way we feed ourselves. Too big?
Well, it brings to mind, I think so many of us women and people everywhere, I think, are struggling because this idea or notion of self-care is so indulgent, and it feels sort of selfish in a way. And even in ways that aren't even conscious, right? It's like almost difficult to just allow yourself to take that 20-minute power nap because you just need it. Because, what is the block? What is the resistance? And I think it's because we haven't fully embraced the idea that what's good for us is good for other people. And I think in what you're saying, it's like a total inseparability, right?
Completely. On an energetic level and on a cellular level, it's key. And to me, that's amazing that, to me, it makes me want to talk to like 10-year-old girls, be like, look, when you want to have kids one day, if you want to have kids one day, like, here's how to take care of yourself. Like, and here's why to take care of yourself, and do it anyways. But if you want to have kids, it's also going to like change that. Like, how can we start this conversation earlier is what excites me, not just when we want to get pregnant. Right. That to me is like a huge power. And then the other thing that came to mind with your previous question is also this, like a little bit of the idea of the miracle of being able to become pregnant and carry a pregnancy and birth a baby and then nurse a baby and exclusively have them grow on that for 6 months. And then, like it's kind of amazing what we can do. And there's
totally,
from Chinese medicine, there's like a million ways we understand that and can support it. And, we can come in here. But then like one of my Chinese teachers, she always says, like, I don't know when life will come in. Like there is this force that happens, right? Everything can be perfect. You can be perfectly nourished. You can be taking great care of yourself. And, you could be like with a partner who lights you up, and it just isn't happening for whatever reason, or not with a partner and, doing it another way. I mean, there's a million ways to have babies now, but everything can look and feel perfect. And we still don't know when life will come in. There's that piece, right? I don't know it. Western doctors don't know it. Nobody knows it. And
you can't control it.
No. And that to me is so beautiful. And I mean, I fall into it all the time. I try to control it, right? I try to control it for my clients who want it so bad, and they try to control it for themselves, and their doctors are trying to control it, and everybody's studying to try to find this out. And I just don't think that I think there's meant to be this piece of that. I don't know, luck isn't the right word, but just like, I don't know, this miracle, this energy that we can't control. And we have to find a way to surrender to that amidst doing everything that we can to take care of ourselves.
Somewhat like death. We don't know when it's coming.
Exactly. Right? Very much so. Gosh, that's such a good point. Yeah. So those are my kind of two pillars for women being able to have children.
And is there anything that you find yourself talking about a lot with your current clients? Are there any themes that are just popping up more recently, or say this year, or particular constitutional shifts or changes or new herbs that you're using, or just interesting things that you might have noted in the last year?
I have been using flower elixirs this year. I did not know. I mean, I knew of flower elixirs for many, many years and flower essences. And I just had never found the right moment to use them. I've even taken them before from other practitioners, but I don't know. And then I met you and got introduced to your work, and it all just started to make sense. And I study or cite in your books, and I've been recommending them. And I do see a big difference there on all sorts of emotional levels and subtle levels. So that's been really fun. I think every, client I have is on a flower elixir of some kind, and they may not even be on like a formula, or, they're always on some sort of food thing too, but it's just such an easy, approachable way to involve people in a ritual. So yeah, that's been super helpful. And I feel like another kind of theme is this idea of should in my I only work with women, so when I say women, that's why. Should I be in this relationship? Should I be doing this job? Like, and here's all the reasons reasons why I should be doing that, yet, something doesn't feel right. And am I being indulgent for feeling that way? Am I self-sabotaging myself because this is really a good thing? Is it my intuition and I should follow it? And just kind of playing with this should, and this, like, what if we created, what do we expect our life to look like, and where can we redesign it and change it, and where, without kind of taking the fear away a little bit, to actually see what's there. And I'm doing it in a lot of my clients' life, and it's completely coming up in my own life right now with 3 kids and a practice and trying to be a wife and also self-care and all of these things and all of these shoulds, right? And kind of taking a moment to be like, okay, where is my fear coming up, and where can I kind of redesign things so that it feels right and isn't just should.
Oh yeah. I mean, the should so all pervasive, right? It's like there's a lot, like as if, in this incredible world of abundance and multiplicity of possibilities, that that there would be a right way and a wrong way, or a best way, or a most best way, and then everything else is like, not as good, versus having there be like, what if there were 50 best ways? And it's really just like a choose your own adventure. Which way do you feel like going today? I've loved exploring with that concept in my own business of allowing myself to follow what brings me joy in work and trust that I'll be taken care of. And so our team over the years have just really tried to go nuts thinking of things that are fun to do, and versus in the beginning it was like, what do people do to sell things? What do I need to, I have to go to trade shows. And I'll put myself in a lot of places where I frankly didn't fit in.
I didn't want to be.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I wondered just if there was anything that you could add about your own exploration with just sort of, refining your ability to follow the golden thread of, even just like what brought you to Idaho. Like, how can we all encourage each other to listen to that quiet little inner voice and try it, follow it?
Yeah, I'm gonna take your advice here and try and follow the joy, because I think you're so right. We forget that there's wisdom in that, and that you'll be taken care of, right? That it's not indulgent or irresponsible to follow the joy. It can feel that way, at least for me. I have these kind of self-talks, that life is hard, and mothers give up things. They give up their life, right, to have their kids, and it becomes all about the kids. And if you're going to work, well, then work is hard, and building a business is hard. And there's just so many things that society, and then we all have our own individual blueprints of what that manifests like. But for me, like, sometimes my intuition is very clear and very loud and very easy to follow, and sometimes it is not. And when it's not, it's usually because I'm not taking care of myself. So I need to make more space for that meditation. For me, travel's also a big one in giving me perspective and kind of turning up the volume of that little voice inside. For example, I've traveled my whole life. When I've made my biggest decisions, usually happened when I was traveling. But we had my second child, and during that maternity leave, we went to the Bahamas for 2 months with my husband, who's an artist, who got a residency there. And that was the first time that we had spent an extended period of time together outside of New York City. It was like the world cracked open, and we saw life as it could be anywhere, not just in the Bahamas, which was lovely and wonderful.
Right.
But, we saw, there's more. We want more for ourselves. We want more for our kids. And so it was so clear, I had built this practice of 7 years, and I was like, it's time to close, it's time to move on. And if we hadn't had that experience, I could see myself hemming and hawing over that decision for a year, right? Versus a month. So the message that I'm trying to convey with this is that if you do have that feeling of you're on the edge of something, but you're not quite sure which way to go, and which way is your intuition and which way isn't, then find a way to create more space for yourself. If it's travel, take a trip. If it's meditation, then commit to it. Do 40 days of something and see how you feel after 40 days. I have a feeling something will be clearer. And then you got to take the leap, just like you said. Like when the intuition is talking, then you follow it and you don't question it. You trust that you'll be taken care of, and you make adjustments as you go. But when it's strong and calling you, it's there for a reason, and it has your back ultimately. And by ignoring it, you'll suffer longer, even though it could seem like excruciating to make such a big change in your life, whatever it is. It can feel like it's going to be a lot more painful to do it than not do it, but that's not actually true. That's a trick your mind plays on you.
Right. And I think it's like we can't see the other side from this perspective. We can't see what's going to happen on the other side. And if we could, boy, that would be a lot easier to take that leap. But I think getting like working that muscle of just trusting, you just try a little bit and then you try it again and you try it again. And suddenly, that becomes your mode of operation in the world.
Yes, absolutely. It's working that muscle. It takes practice and training.
And is there anything else that you can think of for the listeners, like tips or things that you might recommend for as we transition into the winter season? Any last little tidbits of Chinese medicine that we could implement right now?
Oh, yeah. It depends where you live, how wintry you'll be, right? But no matter where you live, the winter energy moves inward. So right now we're in autumn, and I find things, to be a little chaotic. And I like to think about the trees in my climate. I live in the mountains. It's very extreme seasons, and the trees have all these beautiful leaves that are now, golden, and they just fall and they shed, right? And the trees do this because in order for them to survive and have new growth and new vision in the spring, they have to let go, right? They cannot stay attached to this part of themselves, right? They have to let it go. So I love to just try and reflect on that for myself this season and pass that on. I pass it along. I'm writing a lot about it in my newsletters right now, but this kind of theme of letting go, using this time, it's so energetically ripe to just like trim the fat. Like what isn't necessary for your survival this winter? And then as the winter comes and your energy moves inward, it kind of, is in hibernation mode. It's in nourishment mode. It's in foundation mode, getting ready to build, the vision of the spring. So focusing on being warm physically in your environment. Even if you're in a little bit warmer environment, you can still kind of like take that extra precaution, right? To be out of wind or, cover yourself up if you're chilly. Keep your the soles of your feet warm, which is where the kidney meridian starts, which is the water meridian, which is the energy of winter. So using kind of that idea and allowing for the hibernation. Winter is just such a good time for being and seeing what's there, right? After you've let go of things you don't need for your survival, what's there and what's simmering and what's bubbling up and getting ready for spring. And just allow it. Don't try to bring it out into the world too early or push it. Don't poke the bear either. Just like let it rest and see what wakes up when winter's done.
I love that. See what wakes up. That's so great.
5-element prescription.
Thank you so much for being here. I just appreciate all your wisdom and dedication and experience. And I need to make an appointment with you.
Yeah.
I want a doctor like you. So I'm just going to add that if anyone else is feeling that same way, you can actually email her. This is incredible. When is the last time you got this from a doctor? For a free 20-minute consultation. And her email address is Erin at Erin Borbet, and that's spelled BORBET.com. And if you just want to learn more about her work in general, her website is erinborbet.com. And she has a fantastic blog with all kinds of recipes and fun information. So highly recommended to check it out. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's so lovely to chat with you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.